And welcome back to my channel. Whew, tired. It's really humid outside and I just feel tired today. I don't like the humidity. Another thing, I'm supposed to have a meeting with my uncle, a Zoom meeting with my uncle this week, which has been happening weekly. Because he talks to me about physics because he's a physicist. But I just don't feel like I have the energy or the social motivation to do it anymore. Just because I find it really difficult, like having to engage with anyone socially, and sometimes I just don't have the energy, particularly when it's one-to-one, when it's like full on for me, like I have to engage. It's not like I can sit there in the background. I have to kind of put on my social face and I have to socially engage with the other person. I'm just not motivated. It's like, at first I had the interest because I was learning something, I guess. And I could do it for a couple of times. But now I've got to the point where I don't really have the energy or motivation. Like, in theory, like, I think it's good. And in theory I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. And then when it gets to the point, when it gets to the point of doing it, I just don't have the social motivation or the energy to do it. Because it's too much effort. It's not like doing a video like I'm doing now. I'm talking about an actual social interaction situation where you have another person staring at you through a screen. I just don't have the motivation to do that because it's a social situation. It's different like when I'm in a group, like when I'm attending one of the groups I attend to, like the various autism groups I attend, because that's not so full on, and also I don't know, it's just a different situation. Like I could kind of relapse into the background a bit if I want to, and it's not so full on, and I don't have to engage in the same way. Because it's different. It's very intense because it's just me and another person, and I just don't have the social energy to do that right now. Like, I just don't. But I don't know how to communicate it to them in a polite way to say I'm not interested anymore. And because I'm not, and so basically I'm just avoiding it, and I'm constantly coming across as rude because I keep on like not attending and stuff, and then having to come out with excuses. But I don't know how to communicate to them. But I don't want to do it, and I know like I need to do that because obviously I know like it's just going to look even more rude, me constantly like not attending and stuff. But it's like when my brain doesn't want to do something, it can't do it, but I don't know how to communicate it to them. Like normally, I know a normal person would just be able to explain to them, oh, I can't do this, but I just don't know how to do it. So I'm going to be speaking to my psychologist tomorrow, so I need to ask her how to actually communicate in a polite way that I don't want to do something, because I'm really struggling with that, and also I feel a bit scared about what they will say. So it's kind of putting me off, and I don't know how to do it. Oh God, I'm just too tired. I was going to do it earlier and I was all up for it. Now I'm just like freezing up. I just can't be asked. It's too much effort. My brain just doesn't want to go into that social mode. It just can't. I just don't want to do it. It's just too hard work. You know what I mean? It's like when someone suddenly says, I know, say if you suddenly had to do a maths exam, that like a normal person might have to do a maths exam and their brain suddenly can't be asked to do it. It's a bit like that because it's with a social situation, but I just don't have the motivation. It's annoying because I don't know how to explain it to them. That's my life, just tiring. Sometimes I just can't be asked. Sometimes I just lose the will, you know what I mean? But anyway, and I have got another group later on today, which I am attending. A women's group, women's autism group, which annoyingly they've moved to an hour later, which I was very annoyed about because I hate change. I did explain it to them, I processed it now. This was about a week or so ago and I got very annoyed. I did speak to them and they do have genuine reasons for it and they apologised and stuff, and obviously, you know, they've got genuine reasons, so it's just the way it is, and like, you know, I've accepted it. But it's the group's normally on a Thursday, but they changed it to a Monday and they've also made it an hour later. I was quite happy with it being on a Thursday, but shit happens, change happens, and I hate it, but you know, what can I do? Just have to go on with it. So yeah, that's a bit annoying, but at least with that group, it's not full on social interaction, you know what I mean? But whenever something involves full on social interaction with one other person, I could put up with it sometimes, but then I lose. But again, because I don't have the motivation or enough motivation, very quickly I just can't be asked, because it is literally like doing an exam. In terms of what my brain has to go through to do it, it's like doing an exam. Basically, it causes that much stress, that much computation, which people don't realise, and it's so bloody draining. Yeah. Anyway, enough on that topic. I was going to talk to you about another article on. So I'm a bit tired today. Humidity always makes me tired. Non-verbal learning disability. So I was going to cover another article that I found on the NLD line website. An article called. Actually, about two articles I want to go through very quickly. The first one is called Confronting a Puzzle of Non-Verbal Learning Disabilities, and it's written by Dorothy M. Vacker, November 2001. So quite an old article, very old article actually by now. And she basically says that non-verbal learning disabilities affect non-verbal holistic processing of information, such as intuitive responding, and also organisation is impaired as well in non-verbal learning disabilities. So holistic processing, intuitive responding and organisation is impaired. She also says there's a broad continuum in non-verbal learning disabilities from mild to severe. In the most severe form, the functional presentation is virtually indistinguishable from Asperger's and high-functioning autism. So I thought that was interesting. In its most severe form, a functional presentation is virtually indistinguishable from Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism. And indeed, other commentators have also said that Asperger's is basically a very severe form of non-verbal learning disability. So, in other words, those with milder non-verbal learning disabilities might have similarities to someone with Asperger's, but they won't be as severe. So NVLD would be another diagnosis that could be given to those people who have some milder, relative to Asperger's, problems in social, plus those other areas I mentioned, like visual, spatial, etc. But when it gets very severe, it basically becomes Asperger's syndrome, essentially. But then again, as I said in my previous video, not all people with Asperger's have a very specific NLD profile outlined by Walk, but there are various subtypes of non-verbal learning disability. So Asperger's syndrome can be seen as a form of non-verbal learning disability, or a very severe form of non-verbal learning disability, but it gets a bit confusing because clearly not all people with Asperger's have the problems in maths, the problems with visual spatial skills, the higher verbal and lower performance IQ, as was outlined by Byron Walk, which is a very specific form of non-verbal learning disability which some people with Asperger's have, like me, but not all people with Asperger's have, even though Asperger's syndrome itself is a non-verbal learning disability almost by definition. But clearly there are different types of non-verbal learning disability, so it does get quite confusing, because different people say different things as well. So she says that people with non-verbal learning disability are extremely capable in some ways and extremely difficult in others. And then she talks about 7 main categories of deficit. So here are the 7 main categories of deficit that occur in non-verbal learning disability. Number 1, we have visual spatial. But like I said previously, although Asperger's can be seen as a very severe form of non-verbal learning disability, at least in the social side, not all people with Asperger's have the visual spatial problems outlined by Byron Walk. So if you have a visual spatial problems, that suggests you have a very specific form of non-verbal learning disability, which is sometimes called visual spatial learning disorder. I definitely have that, either as part of my Asperger's or as a comorbidity, but the research is kind of mixed as to whether this describes a particular profile within Asperger's or a common comorbidity in Asperger's, and we don't really know because they got rid of Asperger's, but I definitely have the visual spatial deficits outlined in the prototypical NLD formulation by Byron Walk. Also, the other deficit outlined is in cognitive processing, for example, difficulty understanding connections between independent factors and relating these to the whole. So in other words, big picture thinking, seeing the woods for the trees, as is often talks about. So in other words, getting overwhelmed by details and not being able to kind of put those details together to form a big picture. Difficulties with language, which might surprise you considering that people with NVLD have, at least on the surface, are extremely verbal, very articulate, very eloquent, but there are still subtle difficulties with language, but this is to do with the pragmatics of language. So difficulty understanding humour. That's not to say people with NLD and Asperger's, by the way, don't have a sense of humour, because clearly we do, but that's one of the great stereotypes. But it's more to do with the fact that we have problems understanding subtle, sort of neurotypical types of humour that isn't kind of spelled out, basically. So often not getting the joke. And other people can like mistake that for not having a sense of humour, but it's not that at all. It's just that we can be a bit slow on the mark to understanding kind of complex, more subtle humour. Nuances of language, so yeah, taking things literally, basically, sort of language pragmatics, I think it's called, the social aspects of language. Difficulties with motor skills, so there can be a lack of coordination and problems with small motor skills in particular, but also some gross motor skills can also be impacted as well, depending on the person. So yeah, a varying picture when it comes to motor skills, and different areas will be affected depending on the person, but there'll usually be at least some difficulties in motor skills. And there's also deficits within social skills, so deficits in social understanding, particularly in social interaction. And then we have behavioural differences as well. So often in NVLD you'll find rigid behaviour, difficulties with novelty and transition, so difficulties with change. And there are also problems with emotion, so there's a high risk for anxiety disorder and OCD. So those are the 7 areas. Like I said in a previous video, one of the main distinguishing criterion between non-verbal learning disability and Asperger syndrome, bearing in mind that Asperger syndrome is said by a number of people to be a very severe form of NVLD or a particular subtype of NVLD. But one of the main distinguishing features between wider NVLD and Asperger's is that in Asperger's you will also have the obsessive, intense, narrow interests and routines. You will also often find repetitive behaviours such as walking on tiptoes and hand flapping maybe and rocking, and some other sort of more autistic-like features which are less common in NVLD that doesn't also have Asperger's in it as well. And also of course in Asperger's the social difficulties will be a lot more severe. Okay, so I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on talking about the overlap between non-verbal learning disabilities more widely and Asperger syndrome. So moving over to video number 2 now.